Greetings, seekers, and welcome to Heretical Musings. Yes, I am here with the Town Criers Guild, and today we have a very special guest with us, Captain Bridges from the space cargo liner Al What's Up Doc, who has just landed here in Byzantium Secundus with a load of heretical books from far, far distant planets. So, Captain Bridges, what took you?
Well, all sorts of problems, all sorts of pandemics across the known worlds delayed the shipments. But they should be going out soon to all the agoras around the world.
Pandemics, that's false crying if I've ever heard it.
All right. Did you check the tracking? Has that ship actually arrived in New York like it was supposed to?
It shows it at the harbor. Where it goes from here, the pancreator only knows.
All right. So, yeah, what he's talking about are the books for the first wave have arrived in the States, in New York Harbor. How long it'll take from there to get to their actual destinations, who knows? It depends if the League creates an embargo or not.
This doesn't mean hop in your flitter and head out there.
Right, yes.
Obviously,
they won't hand it over.
Unless you have better connections at the docks than we do. Then you can get anything you want. Amazing how Fading Sun's books can fall off a truck if you know the right stevedore.
Yep. Otherwise, you have to wait till your charioteer merchant brings it around town.
Not the charioteers. Oh, well. All right, so that's it from Town Crier Headquarters. Now, let's go ahead and stop antagonizing everyone, Bill, and tell them what we're talking about today.
We are going to talk about antagonists. Those are the NPCs who foil the PCs, the troupe. Well, they can help them too. They don't have to be antagonists. They're just, the non-player characters. They might be your friends, or you might think they're your friends, and so on.
Nobody has friends in the known worlds. Only your trusty blade, which will fall off the hilt the first time you use it, because you bought it from a charioteer. All right. So
we're talking about game master characters, basically. The ones the game master plays.
And Bill's right about NPCs. I mean, you got a number of different types, but we are going to focus on the antagonists. Don't always want to call them villains. You can certainly run games where the PCs are the villains and the antagonists are the questing knights hunting them down. But they're definitely to the PC's protagonists. So, Bill, why don't you tell us about the three types of NPCs in Fading Suns?
All right. In the new edition of Fading Suns, we divide NPCs into three different types, and that's for the ease of the game master. The lowest level are the extras. Those are basically your mobs, your town guard, the guys who just aren't differentiated much as individuals. They don't need a lot of stats and stuff. Next level up are your agents. They're kind of the movers and shakers. That might be the captain of the town guard, the guy you're going to do a little more interaction with. You may have to punch him, but you also may have to do some social influence with him. And then above that, there are the headliners. Those are the guys who are just like the PCs. They've got the same traits and such. And they're the ones who are going to be your key antagonists. Those are your recurring villains, or the ones who are so fleshed out and individual that you can't help but remember them later on.
Now, some of the NPCs you'll stat out to that level might not even be antagonists. For instance, I'm currently wearing Theophana Al-Malik to show off, and of course she was quite powerful, so if you add her on in, you're going to have fun statting her up. Definitely a headliner in many, many ways, if she were only still with us.
Sadly declared dead, and now people are trying to get her canonized. It's an awful quick canonization, though, so it's doubtful such a conservative patriarch as Palamon will go with it, but we'll see what happens.
Oh, why don't we have our old patriarch curse this new patriarch and his crazy family?
Well, even Palamon is still considered a little more liberal than Hezekiah was, so we'll see where this one goes. But yeah, that's an old T-shirt you got there, and somewhere Lou Ferrigno has one just like it.
Heck yeah, still wearing it to this day. So let's talk about creating these. Let's briefly talk about what goes into creating the extras. How much effort you put into these?
Well, extras are the simple ones. Those are the ones that they're pretty much you figure they're going to do only one, maybe two things when you encounter them. If it's the town guard, they're gonna want to spot you sneaking around, and they might fire a gun at you if they catch you and you're doing something wrong. So you're basically only writing down in their stats what their roles are for that and the kind of damage they might do or the effect they might have.
What their social, if there's a social
Right.
extra, what their social
That's
abilities
if it's a
are.
town guard kind of guy. Another one might be a merchant you want to haggle with. And so you might just write his haggling maneuver down. And when the player character is desperately trying to haggle to be able to afford that gun before his enemies close in on him, this is the guy who's kind of the roadblock for him. But that's
And I
all he's ever going to be in the game.
and I personally don't bother leveling these up. I don't worry about first, second level backgrounds, etc. I just put in the stats that I care about, make them the numbers I want them to be, and run with that. And thankfully, the game books that you will be getting someday, have got some examples of these for you.
Well, backers already have the final marked PDFs, so they can look them up in the Game Master book too. So yeah, you don't have to worry about levels for extras. And in fact, vitality also, they tend to just have 10 across the board. You don't tend to want to give them more or less.
All right, so let's talk about some of these agents. How much detail are you going to go into them?
Now, agents, you want to level those too so that they provide some sort of, opposition. You can give them perks if you want to. You don't really need to, work out their capabilities and such because you pretty much assume they've got the capabilities to do the sorts of things you're statting them out for. Like extras, you're going to give them an emphasis on certain actions, certain maneuvers that they're going to do along with whatever role they're playing in the game. The difference is they won't get revivals, so you're not going to have to worry about them taking a second wind and getting some vitality back and so forth. But they will have surges, so they can get extra victory points when they need them. And those surges, again, the number are going to be based on their level. So there can be tougher agents than and lesser agents, and agents in the middle, and so on. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Let's go to the headliners, the fun ones, the arch villains. Usually, though there certainly can be multiple headliners in a game.
Yep, and they're statted out just like player characters. Um, Realistically, when you're actually running these guys, you probably don't need to worry too much about their capabilities because, again, you're going to assume that they've got what they need to. But we tend to stat them out anyway when we do them for the game books, just to illustrate what those characters know and what they don't know, and help the game master along. But during the actual play, the game master probably doesn't need to work out that kind of stuff. But they will certainly have perks. They'll have characteristics, full skills, and they get revivals and surges also. Now, for agents, we do tend to list out all their characteristics and any of the skills that are above three being the baseline for most skills. And that's mainly because there are some maneuvers that you're doing, things like spot and so on, that sometimes you're going against somebody's skill rating rather than for the resistance. So we want to make sure that's in there as a reference guide for the game master also. And the same case for the headliners, they get the full stats for everything.
And I'll admit, I stat out the agents a little bit more than we do elsewhere because, A, I love turning an agent into a headliner later on. I love it when a villain who they thought was someone low down in the pecking order suddenly steps up to be a real threat to them. And also because I'm one of those character making geeks who can make dozens and dozens. I've still got notebooks full of characters I've made up for various games. Not all of them HDI games, I'm sorry to say. But
well, it really comes down to how much the game master wants to put into it, how much work he's more comfortable with. As you get to run the game, you get a little more used to dealing with victory point surges and all that sort of stuff. You can probably tolerate a lot more detail on your agents, but on the basic stuff, you just really only need what you're absolutely going to need during the actual gameplay itself.
Now let's talk about the pools. So your victory point pools are basically ways you can help increase your chances of success, increase the impacts of what you do, etc. And we've talked about how agents and headliners have these. Officially, your extras don't, though the pool can be assigned to them if the GM wants, right, Bill? If your headliner's got a pool, they can give them to the extras.
Yeah, yeah. The idea also is that agents don't generally necessarily have a bank. They generally use their cash and their surges,
Right.
and extras just use what they're rolling with each action. They don't. They just got their cashes.
Unless
They
their
don't
boss
get right. They don't get to save any stuff. However, as Andrew said, you can break the rules. You can do this as detailed as you want. If you want an agent who has a bank, give them a bank. Again, since they're leveled, it's going to be based on their level also. But for ease of play, sometimes we just figured, rather than having to count all this stuff for agents, we'll just leave that to the headliners. But yeah, you can certainly surprise people now and then. And, if your players are a little playing on too meta a level and figure out that guy's an agent, he's not going to have a bank, you can certainly give him one and surprise them all.
And I certainly love seeing this role played out. So, for instance, when one of the extras suddenly hits and the headliner puts a bunch of different points into making that really get through some resistances the PCs didn't think it would get through, and you followed up with the headliner ordering that agent to do it before he goes to the torture chamber,
right,
or kills the entire family, or do it out of love for the pancreator, and the Avestite hurdles herself in with flame gun going. Those are always a lot of fun. Makes ramps up the drama significantly. So it's very funny because, well, we'll talk about motivations a little bit more, but when you do make your agents, have it in your back of your head that they might graduate up to headliner. I've done this so many times where an NPC I thought would get wiped out really catches the PC's imagination. They really like her for whatever reason, so she has to come back in some role later on. So yeah, don't be afraid. Don't just do them as authorities. The other thing I've noticed, I am definitely guilty of this, and I've seen a lot of GMs do it, where they have kind of a rigid definition for the arch villain or the main antagonist, and then they go more free form with the agents, with the helpers, and let them be wackier, more interesting characters. And those are the ones that PCs end up gravitating towards, and you want to keep around after the big headliner has been wiped out. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the pools now and then again later. Let's talk about managing these, setting them up, etc. I'll admit that I focus primarily on high drama for use of their pool. Using the pool at the coolest moment for the coolest reaction is usually the most fun. But how else do you use the antagonist pool, Bill?
Well, I mean, if you're referring, there was a pool that everybody had. We kind of dropped that for the final version. And we'll probably be bringing it in back as an optional rule because it's a fun way to do it. Since agents and extras don't have banks anymore, the idea was to have a shared pool for them that the game master just uses to draw from whenever any of these NPCs do stuff. So as one NPC does something really well, he's feeding into a pool that then all the others can pull off of. But likewise, when an NPC draws from that pool, there's less for the others too. So it's a fun little extra to do that unfortunately it got cut from the final version of the book, but is a fun optional rule. It's going back in at some point. And it's really, though, for game masters who are a little more comfortable using victory points, the ebb and flow of them and such, because it is a little extra to keep track of. But there's a lot of fun there. And the headliners can move some of their victory points into those pools, too, and back and forth. So they can kind of be these masterminds that are helping out certain groups of NPCs and not others. And then when player characters do certain things, like they have critical misses and such, and the game master gets a weird point, that could go into the NPC pool and stuff also.
And I have to admit that personally, I love it when there's a third party involved. For instance, the PCs are trying to rescue the prince from the assassin who's been hunting him down, and she's about to strike with the deadly blow, and that's when the PCs show up. So the headliner, the assassin, is spending points to try and kill another NPC while the PCs are trying to save this useless prince who's been caught in distress. Mm-hmm. So look forward to fun with those. And of course, the people you're rescuing never have the points to spend that their foes and adversaries have.
Yep.
All right. So let's fire his gaudily decorated rifle into air. Ululates wildly. The Khalifa is here. The true protagonist, The Caliph and no one from the Kurgan lands is ever an antagonist, right? Right, Caliph?
Of course not. Well, the known worlds are the antagonist.
That's right.
Kurgan, protagonist.
Protagonist or antagonist just depends on which book you're reading, which heretical text you've opened, you've cracked open and gotten into. But speaking of that, let's go ahead and talk about motivations, because one person's protagonist is another's superhero. So let's talk about what motivates some of these folks do what they do. We'll talk mainly about villains, but there's certainly other ones. Now, we always have the classic kind of almost two-dimensional villain. They want power because otherwise they're afraid people can use power against them. They project their own desires to hurt people onto others and believe everyone else is going to do it to them. So they're kind of the easy default villain to create. They want power. They'll hurt everybody because they're afraid otherwise it'll happen to them. What do you think, Bill? What are some of the other very basic ones? Another one is the fanatic, often a religious fanatic or something else. Again, almost two-dimensional. They're always going to act in this way because it's their core belief.
Well, really, the foundational one for Fading Suns is simply faction. All these factions have their own goals, and they compete with others at times. Sometimes they work together. Obviously, a troupe of player characters is going to be an example of them trying to work together. But in other situations, it's just factional differences. There's not necessarily anything personal. It's just that somebody's faction wants something, and another faction doesn't want them to have it or wants it instead, in which case they're just going at it on that level. Now, there are some who make it a little more personal, such as the famed rivalry between the Ducados and the Hawkwoods. But beyond that, there's not necessary. And yeah, on an individual level, you can certainly have people who took personal certain injuries and stuff done to them by certain factions during the Emperor Wars, but that's 20 years on now, so you've got whole new generations of people coming in who put that stuff to rest, and yet they still haunt certain high-level enemies who are going to be playing on those old playbooks and remembering old hurts and such, old vendettas they'll need to pull off.
Yeah, and we certainly love that standard archetype of a villain. So like a very early first level or second level Ducados villain in the game is just trying to rise up in the ranks of the family and has to do some kind of crazy machinations in order to prove herself worthy before she can get any kind of power within the house itself. You can have the Hawkwood, who's just classic, ready to respond at any perceived insult, and everything can be perceived as an insult. So suddenly you have a duel going on. The muster, who is officially in the labor side, but is always looking for a slave to sell off. And if the PC looks weak, whack over the back of the head and try and haul him off to be sold in chains. So I mean, these are kind of classic villains, and every faction does provide these villains. I mean, no faction is 100% heroic. No faction is 100% scheming villain. So the Hawkwoods are 99% there. Okay, everyone sees the Ducados is 99% there. But there's always another.
Even Sanctuary Aeon isn't completely pure. They might have the reputation as such, but in certain places they can get pretty strict about what people are allowed to do and what they can't do and such. They're not necessarily going to withhold their medical services, but you can certainly see Nurse Ratched from One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a certain type of Sanctuary Aeon. She's doing the best that these people need and deserve in a mental institution. So, not even they are completely pure. You can certainly run some very twisted antagonists from Sanctuary Aeon.
And talking about a group that is easy to end up possessed. I mean, they're dealing with the sickest. That sickest is possessed. Suddenly they're possessed. You've got the demonic healer running around. You're ready to have all kinds of fun. In addition, something that Bill and I played with previous games we worked on, I haven't done this in Fading Suns yet, I really should, are those twisted healers. I mean, you see them in the news occasionally, where mass murderers are a nurse and just putting people down for whatever reason. And you can play with this level of healer as well, where that person who is seen as the guiding light of the community is hiding this twisted other interior. So let's go into that type of antagonist next. The one who appears initially as your friend, buddy, protector, supporter, the best person around, and then flips on you. How do you go ahead and implement some of these, Bill?
Well, I mean, sky's the limit on those sort of things. I mean, that's a lot of mysteries are based around those kind of false impressions of who somebody is and such. Someone who might first appear to be a patron, but he's really tricked you into coming in for some other reason. Either it's a demonic sacrifice, or it's simply to uncover the treasure that he couldn't find himself that he thinks you guys will. All sorts of levels on that sort of stuff, and it always winds up with the betrayal at the end. Or the guy you thought was the nice, kindly guy is really the guy running around in the monster suit to scare everybody away from a certain place. And thanks to your Vorox and
You
the rest of the
meddling
troop,
kids, they're Vorox too.
you're able to stop them.
And I'm not a big fan of the whole betrayal arc. I mean, Shadowrun and others really popularized this. And it got to the point when you played Shadowrun, you just expected that you're going to be screwed over by your fixer at some point. So it stopped being betrayal. You just knew it was coming. But I've definitely known GMs who enjoyed this far more than their players did. What I like to do with this, however, is give the PCs a chance to redeem the villain in this situation. The classic one is that healer who gets possessed. I mean, it's easier probably to kill the healer and not have them doing their reverse healing on everybody, but can you get the demon on out of them? Can you bring about a conclusion that works for everybody? Can you get them to stick to their original deal instead of betraying you? I always find those the funnest and more of a challenge than just a straight betrayal storyline.
Yeah, I would say be careful with the betrayals. Don't have too many of them. And the other thing is, one of the things about these factions is sometimes other members of a faction are going to have to make right what another member of their faction has done wrong. And so they kind of have to police themselves, and people who are too constantly going against their word against others are going to besmirch the family name, or no one's going to deal with the guild anymore, or they're going to lose faith in the church. So each of these sects, orders, and guilds are going to kind of police others. They're not going to allow but so much betrayal to go on. So you got to be careful with those.
Let's talk about these, Bill, because I think you hit on one of my favorite type of Fading Sun storylines, where it is your own faction that you're having to fight against for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
It is if you're the Hazat, there is that warring aspect of it. So they're going to fight other Hazats, and are you going to let him take your land, or you're going to save you in this? The engineers, the old boy had a great story arc about a schism within the engineers, which if you haven't seen their gaming videos, check them out. They had a lot of fun. I think that they all love the Engineers Guild and they hate it in equal measure. So they did a great line with that. And in the religious side, that's so rife for potential with exactly this sort of storyline. Where are you the Avestite who is the hardcore, or do you see that there is a role for otherwise? Are you going to have to fight other Avestites to save a seeming heretic who brings greater good to everybody? And when you get the eschatonics in on this, when you have 10 eschatonics in a room, you've probably got 13 different religious points of view, dogmas, and heresies going on at the same time. So just really enjoy letting them mix it up. And your own eschatonic there, who's trying to do good for everyone, has this other eschatonic who say, the best thing we could do is just destroy the planet. And working from a higher motivation, but oh my goodness, can you?
They'll reshape it later using forbidden terraforming techniques left over by Dormans.
Tear down the city now and reshape it later with terraforming. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoyed us putting into Fading Suns, and I don't think many other games do to this extent, dealing within your own faction. Other games, you'll be part of a faction, but you'll believe that entire faction is evil, or you'll always be supporting that faction no matter what. So
right.
I love that.
House Hawkwood has this factionalism growing schism between those who are rather angry at Alexius for not really bringing the house into all the full rewards they deserved, because he's now emperor, and that faction is sort of has a figurehead in Alexius's own brother Alvarex, and so some people are going to have to decide which side to go with, Alvarex or Alexia.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun with these internal dynamics, and it's really funny. Morden Crimson is noting that within the Avestite order, doctrinal differences are settled with discussion in Ka oil, nice and flaming Ka oil. And I forgot to mention the Bosti BR when we were talking about terraforming. Puts out the Doramas bestseller, Terraforming 101, which
We
is
had terraform to save it.
the fact that he needed pentagrams and crystals to create his terraforming machines makes them look at them askance.
Yep, no one really understands what he was all about fully. Even the planet Pentitude doesn't understand.
They understand. Like I said, they've read Terraforming 101, and 5 of them have read it, and there are 10 different interpretations as a result.
Except if Dormos wrote it, it wasn't Terraforming 101. It was more like Terraforming 15,301. Yes, exactly.
There are 2 people.
You have 3 PhDs in terraforming? Okay, now maybe you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go into some of the other motivations we've incorporated into Vedic. We've talked about faction, but there's also family. And one of the things, Bill, that I've always loved that you did with the stories we put in there with Illustro's Journeys was the family elements. It was such a core part of it. Arian Lihalan's battles with her brother, other people who are having issues with their family patriarch, and mixing that all in, because can your family ever really be full-on antagonists? Is there always a hope that you'll be able to work with them in the end? How do you play out those sort of family dramas within the game?
Oh boy, there's all sorts of levels too, and because it's not just, I mean, obviously you think of noble houses when you think of family, but obviously that's not the only level, because there are guild families too. A lot of them, especially Reeves, Gravers, and stuff, are very family oriented and building up the hierarchies from within the blood in a way. But it's also the case throughout all levels of the known worlds. And so family's both your boon and your bane. They're going to help you and get in the way of you too, especially on those the ones who expect too much of you and they keep demanding certain things. And obviously one of the standard player character types is the one who ran off to join the questing knights rather than have to put up with whatever their parents wanted them to do. Or then there's the one who was only going to inherit at most a small shack because all her brothers and sisters before her are inheriting all the good stuff, so she has to go out and make her own fortune and not getting the cent from the family, but yet she's still tied to the family, still owes them certain things, and sometimes is going to need their help. So a lot of times family are just as much helpers as they are antagonists, and the antagonism comes in when your dad's got a vendetta against somebody else, and now you got to enact it for him, especially once he passes away. That vendetta doesn't die with him. So now you've got to figure a way to solve it. Are you going to try to resolve it, or are you going to try to win it? And so on and so forth.
And I love what you were saying about the quest giver who's always insisting you give more. This can be family or other. The classic example of this in mythology is Hercules, who goes on his 10 quests as on behalf of one person who doesn't want him to ever succeed, and keeps giving him tougher and tougher quests in hopes that he'll finally fail. Yep. So interesting level of headliner in that, standing up against all these other headliners along the way. So then we've got the headliners who are on the move up. These are the folks who actually see the PCs as a stepping stone. Maybe they want their gear, their spaceship, whatever. So pirates fall into this nicely. You can find bounty hunters on this level serving someone else, becoming a whole headliner in of their own, especially if you've got a jetpack. And trying to find weaknesses in the PCs, always especially good if for some reason the PCs start getting really cocky about their abilities and their cool toys. Mm-hmm. Bobosti BR noting about Illustro's journal, Palamon's letter to Illustro is brilliant.
Yeah, that was really good. That one was actually written by Christopher Howard. I give him all due credit. I wrote the Illustro, he wrote the counterpoint. Really good job.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff.
And Babasti also notes about cool mothers in NPC can be brilliant, and references Oksana Troy, Dakotas.
Not all PCs need to be orphans.
Yes.
Yeah. Those far too many are. I mean, if PCs represented the general populace, what 1 in 5, 1 in 6 would be orphans.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. When you're building your characters, their backgrounds also gives them their obligations, the things that are going to ensnare them later on or give them motivation to go and do things. And those are all going to be done through NPCs, whether they're antagonists or just helpers or aides or whatever. So that's certainly something as you're building your character. Who are their family? They're going to be calling on it. They're going to have to come back rescue them. Are they going to call them for favors? Is the family good name something that you're at risk of ruining, or are you only going to help it?
Right. All right, let's talk about a little bit about the long-term care and feeding of antagonists and how things change over time. So one of the things I like in Fading Suns is how an antagonist might not even realize that PCs exist at the beginning. Say the PCs are running around on Pandemonium, and Aaron Ennis Sharn is going to end up being their Dakota's emissary, but he doesn't even know they exist at first. So they start with issues with the police force, build up to some of his enforcers, and maybe 5 or 6 levels in, finally the count will even take any notice of them. So in this case, Bill, would you even stat out the headliner that early?
You don't need to. Again, it depends how much work you want to do. If you think it's going to help you understand his motivations early on, sure. But really, you can just keep him vague up until the point you think he's actually going to come on stage. At which point, then you can. You might want to wait too to see how fast your troop is leveling up, and make sure that he matches or exceeds their level too. And so, hang on until you need to. But again, if you think it's something really important to help you understand him, their motivations, go ahead. It's your choice.
Well, let's talk about the leveling up. How that would go. I mean, that will happen both with agents and the headliner now.
Yeah, if they're recurring antagonists, you're certainly going to want to have them grow the same way players are. And they're going to grow up to your story needs, though not necessarily on the same speed as the player characters. So when you meet an antagonist again, maybe at that point he's a little behind the troop or way ahead. It depends on what you think he's been up to in the meanwhile and how far they've been going.
And let's talk a little bit about the fact that it's not just leveling that can help them improve. If you want to do something interesting with them, if they go cyber crazy, if you've had a fun antagonist, a fun little agent in there, the PCs are always beating. And then one day they see that she's got every cyber implant and is madly tearing through the streets, destroying everything on her quest to kill them. She doesn't have to be statted out correctly. That just straight up happened.
Right.
It's time to have all sorts of fun with it. The same as if you suddenly want to have a psychic's dark side take over, the shadow take over, and run free.
Exactly. I mean, think about leveling. It's really just there's a guideline talking about NPCs. It's there to kind of give you a rough idea of how they might fare against the troop. But since the troop tends to be pretty darn ingenious, because you've got multiple minds there and multiple imaginations coming up with answers to all sorts of things, that's why they always surprise the game master. And
then they're crazy.
The game master. Right. So, don't worry about it too much. Give them what you think they need ahead of time to take on the troop.
Yeah, but Basti BR brings up an interesting point. I use layers of antagonists. Big bad, and underneath that are lieutenants. Underneath them are team leaders. Underneath them are agents. Underneath them are grunts. The troop deals with the grunts in the early game, not even imagining how deep the rabbit hole goes. And another level are often the NPCs we don't really expect to interact with the PCs, but they play a major role. So I did a Scraver type game where the Scravers were always keeping an eye on the PCs, do everything they were going. The PCs thought they were being shadowed, but yeah, just on every block, the urchin saw what happened and would pass it on. So they weren't being followed. It's just wherever they went, there was somebody who would see them and report back. So there's even that lower level of I don't even want to call them grunts, because the PC should never physically interact with them except maybe to try and bribe them. These are the ones, and they're definitely the lowest of the low-level extras. They're practically environmental in how they are in the game. Batanka asks, in all of your own games, what was the most memorable antagonist and why? So everybody in chat, we'll let you answer that question before we start dealing with it. We'll save that for later on in this conversation. But let's continue to talk about the long-term use of the NPCs. I see it classically in role-playing, where when an NPC is used over a long term, that villain's plans get more grandiose, crazy, and destructive. Their first one, it might be they're just trying to steal the little old lady's hut. The Reeve get a bad contract on her, out to steal the old lady's hovel, and the PCs stop him. Then the next level up, maybe the Reeve is trying to get the Count to prosecute the PCs for heresy and bring some Avestites into it as well. And then finally, they get to a higher level encounter where they realize that the Reeve has been completely corrupted by the sin of money and involved in all sorts of heresies aimed at bringing down the Emperor himself. Is that, Bill, is that the arc you usually see? And is that necessarily the best way to do it?
Well, it's certainly one a lot of they rely on, and if the villain's good enough and they want to keep them going. But it's a bit, as you said, grandiose on that level. I think it's more interesting is if it's a step, as Basti said, a stepped layer of antagonist you're meeting. So at first, you're dealing with Sheriff of Nottingham, and you'll never run into Prince John and stuff. But then when things get bad enough, and all of a sudden you're going to have to deal with Prince John and any other levels of villainy and stuff. So, I mean, in Fading Sun, someone's always got someone else on top of them, some liege lord, some guild master, or somebody and such. So unless that Reeve is the guy running the show, he's got guys on, who he's working for. So at first you're foiling his particular plans against that little old lady's hut and stuff. And so then he's working a little vendetta against you, but eventually you may start running into foiling the plans of his boss, and then that's when his boss gets involved and wonders why this other guy hasn't taken care of the situation yet, and either then brings in another antagonist entirely, or strengthens up that original antagonist. So now you're having to deal with him on a whole level now. He's got all sorts of new powers and abilities that he can hire more people. He has a wider network, can bring it against you, those sorts of things. So I think it's important to keep in mind on all those levels of that chain of command and connections and networks. So whenever you're antagonizing somebody, you're not necessarily just antagonizing them. You're potentially antagonizing an entire guild or a sect.
And Bill, you make a great point that sometimes the headliner is really the faction. And I talked about the Scravers before. I mean, it's not just that Scraver organized crime boss. It's that entire organized crime structure. And if you kill the boss, someone else is going to take her place and be after you next.
Right.
So it is you should think of the organization itself in many ways as the headliner. We're seeing a bunch of cool antagonist ideas appearing in chat right now. So if others have their own, keep adding him on in. Bubasti BR start off with Madame Sarcarno, a Scraver, back to the Scravers as villains. She just wanted a monopoly of the water trade from the Moonhaven over Cadavis. The players helped the Zandip there circumvent her. That made her angry, and the player had no idea that they had thwarted her plans and why this person was out to get him. Yep, and you don't know the Scravers are out to get you, then you're in twice as much trouble. Admiral Nelson says, I like the idea of PCs meeting the big bad early on, deciding not to end him because it's not worth it, and then adding lieutenants, etc., whom PCs then have to deal with. Yeah, it is an interesting motivation for PCs when they meet the big villain who says, you're not worth my time, and leaves them alive. And
They come to
They
regret
run in
it
fear.
all the time.
Yeah. And but Admiral Nelson had it a different way. The PCs should have ended him when they had the chance. Now that's an interesting point of this. Is mercy a bad thing for PCs and their headliners?
Is what?
Is it bad for PCs to take mercy on their enemies, on the headliners?
Well, again, it depends if they should. I mean, you don't want people to be murder machines running around just killing anybody who's going to pose a problem for them at some point. So yeah, obviously you want mercy, but better than that, it's for them to figure some way of using their connections to get this person imprisoned, or to have proper justice brought, where it's not just troop justice of the sword or so on. It's where this person has violated some law, and so he's got to pay for it either in the noble courts, the regency courts, or the church courts, or whatever. Now,
And
admittedly, that's the typical story, though, where they fought this guy, they brought him to courts and justice, and it's a big question then of whether they're going to buy their way out at that point, or whether the courts are corrupt, and then you've got a whole other different level of
the Joker escapes Arkham. But remember that redemption is one of the themes of Fading Suns. I know Bill's looking forward to playing with this more and more as he moves forward in developing the storyline. But giving the opportunity to redeem the villain and sometimes redeem the PCs is an interesting element to it, especially if somehow the PCs really did wrong the villain. Let's talk about...
I just want to add into that, actually. There's something that I think a lot of people might misassume, is that even the Scraver crime boss is religious on some level in Fading Suns. He's soaked in it. He may not fully believe it all the time, but if push comes to shove, he can be convinced that, yes, he's gone against the strictures of the church, and maybe his soul's in danger, and he might need to repent. Because it's much rare to run across atheists in this kind of world, in a sense. So criminals on some level have some sort of story they tell themselves for how and why they can get away with this sort of thing. But at some point, it may be up to the players to convince them that they can't keep doing that at the cost of their own souls. At which point, they might be able to be turned around, and it would be the players' troupe could help them do that.
Yeah, remember, even the worst Dakato's lord has a chapel in her castle that she worships at religiously. And we talk about this elsewhere, that many folks see the world as a threatening place, and they have to make it safe for themselves and theirs at all costs. Mm-hmm. So they will not necessarily be seeing what they're doing is wrong. Your opposition to them is really what is wrong. Now, on the other hand, there are those straight up con men who enjoy just conning people, getting them to believe what sort of stupid things is. So they'll give them all sorts of donations, raise them up in stature while they continue to take advantage of them repeatedly. We haven't really talked about narcissism and sociopaths as a motivation, because that is rather two-dimensional, but those two dimensions are real dimensions, as we've seen. So,
yeah, unfortunately. As Phantom of Truth said, I tend for antagonists of the pizza delivery person the party didn't tip. Come back way later once they've made it. Yep. So even, that beggar you stiffed remembers you. Yeah, that's a good one. Especially if he was a vagabond in disguise, and now he's told every other vagabond about it. And so the entire universe knows you're the guy who doesn't tip or give away stuff.
Babas DBR once made my players be the snakes in paradise. They went to a paradise lost world that had a pacific and true meritocratic society. The Hawkwood character loved the non-resistant populace and accepted him with open arms, and was anguished about destroying utopia.
Beautiful.
I told you, Bill, it's Hawkwoods. It's always the Hawkwoods.
Of course. Well, I mean, if they didn't know their proper place in the Pancreas hierarchy, how much of a utopia was it anyway?
Now, the other fun thing we have in Fading Suns are the alien motivations. Why is that a score by doing anything other than it's nasty, nasty, nasty? How do you deal, Bill, with a creature whose motivations are not human. They're inhuman, literally not human, because they aren't humans. How do you add that in? How do you make the Ukar the headliner, the Obun the headliner, or the Vow?
Well, you dig into their culture and figure out what their motivations are, just like anybody else. The big difference being is that the troupe won't necessarily understand their motivations coming in. So that might be a slow reveal, depending on how long you want this guy to be a antagonist, or it may be just one-off story that's about finding out those motivations. So they're going to seem mysteriously only to people who don't understand that culture from the inside. But if one of the troupe is playing in a score fight, well, obviously the game master is going to want to feed him clues now and then about the possible motivations of the score bite antagonist. It's a little different with the Vow. You can't play them necessarily. I mean, I guess you can, but you can't necessarily play a Vow who's fully within the hegemony. You'd be one of the outliers who's not fully involved in up to speed on what's going on. But so they're a little more mysterious, and that's the whole point of the Vow. Is they're the mysterious one. Stand back and maybe moving things in ways nobody sees. There's a big giant chess game going on, and no one knows the pieces or when they're moving or what's going to affect the board. There's little clues now and then, such as they think that one of the reasons they offered the Pandemonium jump route, opened it up again, was because of that mysterious jump gate. That's a partially built jump gate. Who knows what will come of that? And but also on the other side was Ivor, which starts up a big giant religious schism. And maybe that was their whole point, to just watch what happens when humans start having these giant planet scale schisms. Who knows what they're up to or why they do the things they do.
And even humans can be inhuman. We have the Changed. We have lost worlds that have been separated now for thousands of years from the rest of humanity. So we've got all sorts of different fun things to do. The Changed are always a great example for motivations that the players might have no way to really understand what's going on, yet have to deal with. What is their true motivation? What does love mean to the Changed?
Same for golems too. I mean, what happens when golems start programming themselves, and what are their motivations then when they're not following their original design?
What is the goal of the Imperial Eye that runs the the AI? No, wait, wrong. So, yeah, you can have fun with the technology as a headliner as well.
Yep.
So maybe
and also, even when you take it to the demonic levels, what are the goals of the Gothic demons who are manipulating the known worlders? What do they really want? Is it just destruction of souls, or is there something even more subtle, more long-lasting?
And remember that there are Theurgists whose main goal is to incorporate those Empyrean figures, the angelic beings, who are, again, unfathomable, awesome, and awful all at once.
Mm-hmm.
So,
bodiless intelligences of the Empyrean and all their grandeur and mystery.
We've had some comic books recently which have done a great job with the angels essentially as the antagonists. So
there's actually a book by Richard Smoley, your old pal, on how God became God. And as he mentions with Paul, when he talks about the powers and principalities and how to beware of them and get around them, he's not just talking about demons the way a lot of evangelicals today think. He's also referring to angels, because the angels are the ones who go around bossing everybody and laying down the law. And the idea in Paul's mind was that Christ came to break some of that. And so the idea was try to, avoid those assholes who are doing their best to lay down the law. It's not just demons you're looking out for. Sometimes it's the angels.
After all, we're superior to them because we have free wills, spelled with a Z. So, yeah, all sorts of fun elements in that. All right, we're down to our last 10 minutes before we go ahead and do our big reveals of favorite villains. Bill, do you want to... Oh, I'm sorry, I have some announcements to make. Right. First of all, speaking of antagonists, and I was going somewhere with that whole Inhuman antagonist thing, apparently we had 8 Fading Suns games at the last Ulysses Con. Very impressed. if you played in one of those, I'd love to hear you talk about those antagonists, how you saw them brought out, because somebody on this live stream worked on that adventure that all of you played. So let's hear how good a job Bill did on creating some fun antagonists for you. In addition, I'm planning this month to be doing some live streams for Noble Armada, Emperor of the Fading Suns, and others of that sort. Probably kicking off around May 15th, and I'll be posting that elsewhere. That'll be on my Georgia Game Devs channel. So I'll both be playing the game and talking about the design process for them. So if you're interested in Fading Suns, if you're interested in playing games, if you're interested in game development, that should be a fun opportunity for you as well. And we have plenty of other Georgia Game Dev events coming up. So I'll post here about somebody had a great stream last night with a guy who made a platformer about anime streamers, which was pretty crazy stuff. All right, Bill, you want to start off with favorite antagonists?
Actually, what I want to do is throw in credit where it's due first. If you did play in any of those games and con weekend, the Nightmare in Ingmark, that was the beginning drama from the Game Master's book, and it was written by Vidar Edlund. So if you really enjoyed it, give some kudos to Vidar out there. And so, yeah, antagonist. Gosh, I don't know. Golly.
Well, I'll jump in with Solange Picados. And what I loved
there you go.
was that she could be anything I wanted her to be. She could be, one day she would be obviously the beautiful, evil lady at the grand ball, just absolutely scheming and malevolent. The next day she might appear as a pretty young boy who the PCs have no idea is her. All sorts of crazy agents working. Bobasti BR. Solange is the hero of many of my tales. The hero, absolutely.
What's wrong with all you people? My God.
And she was just the perfect one lurking in the background. It was very rare that the PCs met her and knew they met her, unless they were at a ball where they could not physically encounter her, because I didn't want her to have to completely kill the PCs in one single swing of her blade. But yeah, just perfect. And then anything that happened, whether it was related or not, was always going to be blamed on her. So yeah, that was just when the one super headliner is looming over everything that happens in the game, whether it's there or not. You create that level of paranoia in the players. It's a lot of fun. Batanka says, really love the adventure. Fave NPC was Horsey.
Horsey! Yeah. I'm going to talk about the antagonist that got away. The one I kept meaning to give a lot more face time to, but never did. And that was Arian Lee Halan's brother, Goro, her main antagonist. He was supposed to be building up to something, and then we just went through a big, long period without publishing books, so that when we finally did the new books, when I wrote it up, I realized, no, I just got to wrap that up. We'll have to give her a new antagonist as we grow into this. But so that story kind of ended well before I really meant to bring him on. It was going to be a lot more interesting. So yeah, sometimes they get away from you.
And Bill disagrees with me on this one. What I would love for Palamon to have turned into the big villain, either possessed by demons or malevolent the whole time.
Who's to say I disagree?
And is Palamon really dead if you saw the corpse? Nobody set it on fire like that one Avestai screaming at the funeral wanted to do.
Hezekiah?
That's right. The one Hezekiah, they're screaming away. Wanted to burn the patriarchs.
Yeah, there's all sorts of antagonists I like. They're not necessarily mine, too. But I do like Duke Alvarex a lot and where he's going. And he's detailed a lot more in the House Hawkwood Imperial Dossier as part of that first batch of books. There's other good ones. There's from the Intrigues and Escapades, there's Ozil Duvatha, the gosh, is it Charioteer? I can't remember what guild he is now, but one of the he's the Charioteer head way up high in the guild, mover and shaker. He's one of the patrons and one of the dramas in there. So he's a good one too.
And exactly, we haven't exactly introduced all the fun Voldrock antagonists coming along. So
Oh yeah,
barbarians are going to be a much bigger thing in the game now. So get ready for that. The Boss BR says we love to subvert the trope. Salandra was so wicked that her urge was caring and acting, thwarting her plans behind her back. Salandra's patron and antagonist in the same tale in a schizophrenic fit. That would have been fun. I never thought of taking it that way. The urge ends up being the hero of the evil one.
That's a good one.
That would be an amusing way to take it. And speaking of villains coming up,
that's the thing. Maybe Alexius wasn't in love with Salandra, but her urge. Maybe that's what he thought.
Yes,
he was getting.
I planned that one all along. Wow, what a crazy bedroom that would have been.
Yeah, but when she finally got control of her urge, he lost interest and then found this barbarian instead.
For those of you who want to see other cool villains, the crew of the Old Boy is adventuring today. Robert, is that happening on this channel or on theirs or both? I know they will be putting up the YouTube. They'll be putting up on YouTube fairly soon, so let me know. And if you haven't been following the crew of the Old Boy, lots of fun, and they're going to be doing an introduction to Fading Suns tonight. It's on this channel. Excellent.
Oh, good deal.
And post in the time. It's a couple hours, right? Right. They're doing the Q&A, and they've got a great series of adventures back there. You can look at some really fun villains that they've dealt with over time. A lot of fun motivations along the way. So check that out. And I'm looking forward, once these books are out, to more people starting to stream their Fading Suns game. 5:30 Pacific, so that's 8:30 Eastern and 13:53:78 Byzantium Secundus time. So,
all right, we've only got a few minutes left here. We need to start wrapping up.
All right.
I hope we haven't antagonized everyone too much on this. We have, actually. That was our full purpose. So.
And remember, part of the reason I was talking about this is that we are going, or that Ulysses will be doing that opportunity for all of you to start adding your own Fading Suns content up on Drive-Thru-RPG.
Yes.
And frankly, one of the things I love to see the most are really cool antagonists and their teams and their motivations. And if you want to put out full stories around them, that's great. But I love the characters themselves. I really am that character creating geek who loves making. I do still have, looking over at them, notebooks full of PCs that never got played.
Yeah, one of the old Fading Suns books, Sinners and Saints, was a good one. It was just a whole ton of good NPCs and stuff.
Yeah.
And it'd be cool to see people do some of those too. It'd be nice. Along with creatures, they can be antagonists also. That's one we didn't talk about enough, was creatures as antagonists. It's not just the thinking people.
Bossy BR is working on the Cadavus trilogy. Looking forward to it. Put out that very short first Kickstart adventure to it. Not Kickstart, the first Jumpstart adventure to it. Everyone can jump into it quick and easy and have fun with it along the way. Yeah, and that's one of the good things about having the books. You'll have lots of opportunities. Phantom of Truth. Someone brought up playing a mime in Fading Sun, so I built a telepath mime. I hope both of you got punched by somebody. Or at least shoved deep into an invisible box.
Oh, well, yep.
And you do know that neither the Carnival nor the Mask allows mimes to be members, right?
Of course. Only the vagabonds accept.
Oh, they have the true power. The vagabond mimes have the real power in the
No, it's because the mimes draw all the punches and the clubs. Letting the vagabonds get away from rousters.
They definitely don't want the rodeo clown guild chasing after them. So, most dangerous guild in the known worlds.
There you go. All right, well, cool. We're at 5:59. Thanks, folks. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Maybe somebody will have their books by then. I don't think I'll have mine by then, but maybe somebody will.
It's a possibility. I would certainly like to have mine.
No kidding.
Bye, guys.
See everybody later.